Hey everyone, I'm Alan Thrall here at Untamed Strength Gym in Sacramento, California. This is the next video of this series where I've reached out to guys that I follow on Instagram and YouTube and asked them to create a 1-week sample program, each programming having a specific style. So barbells only, body weight only, bodybuilding, kettlebell or dumbbell only, running and lifting. And these programs are something you could pick up immediately and follow for the rest of time, if you please. This is the bodybuilding sample program, and I've reached out to Basement Bodybuilding, who has an outstanding YouTube channel about bodybuilding, but it's not just stereotypical bodybuilding advice. It goes, I think, far beyond just bodybuilding. Basic training principles, progression, mindset, things that are applicable to any discipline in the gym. So if you like this sample program for bodybuilding, I would suggest going and checking out Basement Bodybuilding's YouTube channel, as well as the programs that he offers.
All right, what's up everybody? Thanks to Alan for having me on the channel and giving me the opportunity to make this free program that I can share with all of his subscribers. So what I want to do today is go through this free program that I have for anybody who's interested in building muscle. It's a general hypertrophy or a bodybuilding program, whatever you want to call it. So I'll dive into the program in a second here, but first what I want to do is discuss not just what you'll be doing in the program, but I want to talk about the reasoning behind all of my decisions and the way that I put the program together. So years ago, as I started to train more and more for hypertrophy, and the more years that I had under my belt trying to gain as much size as possible, I started to realize one big thing when it came to training for bodybuilding, and this is one of the biggest double-edged swords you're going to see in the pursuit of gaining size. It is the freedom that bodybuilding offers. If you look at other sports that are involved with lifting, whether it be strongman or powerlifting, a lot of the time what you'll see is a ton of standardization, and everybody has to eventually compete with a select few lifts. So that adds a ton of standardization to your training, and it adds a core focus that everybody needs to focus on because that's what people are competing in. With bodybuilding, if you are competing, which most people training to build muscle aren't competing, but if you do happen to compete, you're just comparing your physiques. So however you want to get to that physique is entirely up to you, as long as you're getting results that you want. So that freedom, while it can be excellent, it often invites a lot of uncertainty into your training, and it invites a ton of potential gimmicks and fads within the fitness industry itself, and that always starts to creep its way into a lot of our brains, especially when we're second guessing how high our motivation is or how good our results actually are. So what I want to do here is explain the reasoning behind the way that I program, which I believe overcomes a lot of that kind of double-edged sword of that freedom within bodybuilding. So it still gives us the freedom to train the way we want, and that it doesn't lead us to training like powerlifters or strongman. It allows us to train for hypertrophy without sacrificing the principles that build us as much muscle as possible. So what I've been doing over these past few years is looking into why lifts like the squat, bench, and deadlift have stuck around and had such a high reputation for so many decades on end. And the reason why, it's not because these lifts are just the best lifts out there, although they are great when used properly. It's more so a principle. So when people say, I want to go back to the basics and just focus on squat, bench, deadlift, they're really just saying, I want to focus on the basic principles. And there's a few basic principles within training that will allow you to standardize things and make things as straightforward as possible. So what I want to do here is cut the gimmicks, cut the fluff, and make sure that every lift within your training program serves its own purpose. So I want to talk about some of these principles here. The first one is going to be stability. When you look at a lift like the squat, bench, and deadlift, they're all very high in terms of stability. If you look at a bench press, you have a direct opposing force, which is the bench beneath your upper back and your hips. You're pressing the bar perpendicular to the bench as hard as you possibly can. No matter how hard you try, no matter how much weight you're using, that bench is not going to give out. It allows you to exert a maximum force output. And when it comes to lifts like the squat and deadlift, the opposing force is literally just the ground beneath you, and the earth is actually pretty stable in its own place. So when it comes to stability, the squat, bench, and deadlift have a very clear opposing force. If you're to take a couple maybe classic but not quite as highly regarded lifts like a lateral raise or even a curl in some cases, they're hard to standardize because there isn't quite as much of an opposing force. So those lifts are usually kind of respected, but they're never quite treated like they're on the same level as something like a squat, bench, or deadlift. So what we have to do is add that standardization and that stability to the lifts that we're doing in our hypertrophy program, which I'll touch a little bit more on in a second here. So the next point I have here, beyond stability, and I've kind of hinted at this one already, is going to be standardization. So a standardization basically it improves your ability to monitor progress. And when it comes to training for hypertrophy, viewing your own physique can be quite subjective. So when you're looking in the mirror or looking at progress pictures or even measurements, those things can all help, but a lot of the time it is subjective. So measuring your progress through lifts is a really good way to go about it. Years back, power building was a fad where you could measure your progress through the squat, bench, and deadlift. I've talked about it extensively on my own channel, so I'm not going to go in depth on it here, but there are a lot of flaws with that method too. So when people try and come up with ideas like maybe we should do the Big 5 or the Big 7 or the Big 10, a lot of the time it starts off well, but they don't make the right decisions when it comes to picking those lifts to put with the squat, bench, and deadlift. Eventually the program ends up being in some type of hierarchical order where the squat, bench, and deadlift kind of take all the focus, take all the attention. They basically take the cake. Everything beneath it kind of gets labeled an accessory, and you just kind of do 3 sets of 10 and hope it works, right? So when it comes to standardization, our focus here is making sure each rep is as standardized as possible, making sure that there are no weak points or weak links where the tension can leak or where your technique can deviate from what your target technique is. We also want to emphasize a descending resistance profile or a lengthened biased lift. And basically what happens here is it allows you to have a clear lockout on every lift. So if you're looking at something like a squat or a bench or a deadlift, the one thing these lifts have in common, aside from the stability and that very strong opposing force, they have a very clear lockout. So when you lock out your elbows on a bench, it's a very clear lockout. You can pause there for a second if you want. You can kind of just hang out there all day. Same with a squat or a deadlift. When you're talking about a lot of popular hypertrophy lifts like a push down or a curl or a lateral raise, it's a pretty gray area when you get to that failure point, so it's very hard to monitor your strength progression over time. So being able to have a descending resistance profile, meaning it gets easier as you get to the contraction, is super helpful for monitoring progress over time. And I'll discuss some of the lifts that we're using in this program that allow us to get descending resistance profiles across a variety of lifts that you don't normally see. So the last one here, intensity is a main focus of this program. You'll notice that the variety isn't quite as crazy as it might seem on other lifts or what other bodybuilders might be doing, but intensity is going to be extra high on this program due to the increased stability and standardization that each lift offers here. So with all that being said, let's get into the split itself. First off, the split is a pull-push split. It's going to be 4 days a week. On the pull days, you're going to be training muscles throughout the back, so the spinal erectors, the lats, the traps, the rear delts. You're also going to be doing some biceps, and there are hinges involved, so the hamstrings, glutes will be trained as well. On the push days, it's going to be your typical chest, shoulder, and tricep with some lower body squat patterns or leg extensions as well. So let's dive into the first pull session here. So the pull A day is going to be stiff leg deadlifts, 3 sets of 4 to 6 to start. When it comes to the stiff leg deadlift, I have a main cue that I'd focus on here. I want you to pull the bar from the floor and keep your knees behind your ankles. So you want vertical shins or slightly beyond that. You don't want your knees to track forwards over your ankles or over the bar. You can have a little bit of backgrounding and that's totally fine. My personal preference is to do these touch and go style, but still doing that initial pull, dead weight off the floor. These you want to keep about 1 to 2, maybe 3 reps in the tank, maintain good technique, and you should be good here. The next lift is going to be a good old lat pull down, 3 sets of 8 to 10 here. On these lat pull downs, I would go just outside shoulder width, up to 1.5 times shoulder width. Pronated grip, you want your elbows tucked into the scapular plane, so about 15 degrees inwards from fully flared out. That'll be pretty comfortable when you're doing these. Focus on packing your shoulders down, trying to shorten your lats rather than just trying to get the bar as low as you possibly can. Next lift we're going to have here is a T-bar row. Chest supported is preferred but not required, so if you have a chest supported T-bar row, go for it. With these, I like to focus mostly on the traps. So think about flaring your elbows as much as you comfortably can, and think about trying to squeeze your traps up towards kind of like the lower portion of the back of your neck. From here, a couple practical cues that I like to think about mid-set. Think about like you're trying to drive your clavicles kind of back and up, almost like you're doing a shrug, kind of behind you at a diagonal upwards angle. So forget about the lats, don't try and pack your shoulders down, don't try and tuck your elbows, shrug back and up as you row. Think about shrugging with your shoulders rather than pulling with your arms and with your lats. Next lift here is going to be a close grip preacher curl, 3 sets of 5 to 7 reps. If you've never done these before, start light. You want to leave a bunch of reps in the tank. Add 2.5 to 5 pounds weekly until you're at a weight and a rep range that challenges you within that target rep range that we have prescribed. So for these, go for a full range of motion, lock your armpits into the pad, and you should be good. From here, just focus on training as hard as you can. and you don't really have to worry about technique all that much because it's highly standardized. It's a descending resistance profile. It gets easier as you get to the lockout, so it offers that highly stable opposing force with the pad, and it offers a clear lockout just like a squat, bench, and deadlift would. So it's basically like a powerlifting type lift with that standardization for the biceps, which is pretty great for bodybuilding in my opinion. The last lift we have here is a single arm cable rear delt fly. Two main points of emphasis here. One, avoid any rotation. Keep your shoulders square, facing forwards, avoid any rotation. Two, try and get cross body too. The rear delts are going to be active the more you get your elbow across your body like this. So keep that arm locked out, get all the way across the body. I like to go slightly high to low, but ultimately you can go a little bit low to high or perfectly across the body if that suits you better. So that is very much up to preference. That's going to be it for the first pull day. For the first push day, push A, the first lift we're going to be doing here is a Smith feet up bench, 4 sets of 5 to 7 reps. With this lift, you don't have to overthink it a whole ton. The main things I'm going to want you to focus on here, the feet are going to be up, we're tilting the pelvis, and that's going to allow us to use much less arch, which will give you a little bit more range of motion and definitely more pec involvement in my opinion. So when you're doing a Smith feet up bench, you can lift your knees up and kind of keep your feet in the air, or you can plant your feet at the end of the bench. That's totally fine. That is very much up to preference. From here, think about keeping your rib cage down a little bit, flexing your abs a little, and try and drive your shoulders down, almost like you're trying to depress your scaps. What I like to focus on here in the actual set is just driving my armpits down, I'm trying to push my shoulder girdle down into my rib cage. From here, just bench as you normally would, simple as that. Up next is going to be a 60-degree incline Smith press. This one's very straightforward. It's a hybrid between an overhead press and an incline bench. So it will absolutely smoke your front delt. It's going to get a good amount of upper pec work as well as side delt work too. I would keep a mostly flat back, but a little bit of an arch is totally fine on this one. Up next, we're going to have the lying dumbbell side raise. With these, what you're going to want to do is lie sideways on a flat bench. You can kick out your bottom leg for stability. I find this helps a ton. From here, what I would do, raise the dumbbell with a very locked out elbow from the hip all the way up to directly over your shoulder. And what this will do is allow for a ton of standardization and stability. The bench acts as the opposing force. And now since we're turning 90 degrees onto our side, the lockout becomes the easy part and the bottom portion becomes the hard part. So again, it's very standardized, just like a squat, bench, deadlift, or preacher curl at this point. So that adds a ton of stability and a ton of standardization, which makes it very easy to monitor progress over time. The main thing here, try and keep the rib cage down. Think about creating distance between your humerus and your torso, and that is my favorite cue to focus on while doing these. Other than that, keep your elbows locked and try not to overthink this one too much. It is a pretty straightforward lift. Just make sure you're pushing yourself very hard on these. Next lift, we're going to have the easy bar overhead extension. With these, the main cue you're going to want to focus on is keeping your elbows up nice and high. Our boy, Jeffrey Verity Schofield, his favorite cue on this is to imagine you are throwing something kind of right above your head rather than trying to press something up. So think about it as a toss or a throw. I find that helps quite a bit. The main thing you want to think about here is keeping your elbows in a very similar position throughout the whole range of motion. If your elbows start to track forwards a ton as you go down and then they extend back up on your concentric, you're going to be losing a little bit of range of motion at the long head. So ideally have some back support. A seated stationary bench with a low back works really, really well. If you're unable to have that, it's still fine. You might just have to focus a little bit more on keeping your elbows up nice and high. Next lift and the final one for this push session is going to be the leg extension. Very straightforward lift. We're just aiming to hit that twice a week frequency for the quads. And this is obviously the first piece of quad work we have in this week. When you're doing leg extensions, it's a very simple lift, but one thing I like to focus on is as you're extending at the knee, think about pushing with maximum force, but not quite an explosive kick. A lot of people kick too explosively. The weight flies up at the top, it comes right back down, and it gets very difficult to really control the eccentric once it kind of hits you all at once. So keep them controlled, but keep a super, super high force output. For these, we're going to be doing 3 sets of 10 to 12, and we're going into session 3 now. So the pull B session, we're going to start off with single arm pull downs, 3 sets of 8 to 10. When it comes to these single arm pull downs, I am basically leaving it up to you if you'd rather do a machine pull down, so maybe like a hammer strength machine, like this pretty looking machine I have right behind me, or if you want to do a regular lat pull down if you don't feel like going to the plate loaded machine, or if you don't have one at your gym. Either of these work totally fine. The main things you're going to want to focus on with this lift is you want to lean ever so slightly into your working side, and then you want to use either a neutral or supinated grip. If you're doing a cable, I would recommend using a neutral grip, so palm facing inwards. If you're using a machine that only has like a supinated grip, that's totally fine. So think about leaning a little bit into the working side, feel that lat stretch and wrap around your rib cage, let your shoulder and everything elevate at the top. As you come down, try and depress your shoulder, depress your scap, and pack everything down nice and tight, just like that. So pretty straightforward lift, but it is obviously very great for the lats, and it is mostly standardized. And the next lift we're going to have here is a seated cable row, 3 sets of 10 to 12. The traps are going to be the main emphasis here, but there will be a little bit of lats involved depending on the technique that you use. So when it comes to a seated cable row, I actually like to give a little bit of freedom when it comes to selecting the attachment you're using. A lot of people will say the super narrow grip sucks and there's no point using it, we should just vault it. And a lot of people will say the same thing about the wide grip. So very polarized opinions on here. I like to leave it up to you. It really just comes down to your effort and your technique that you're using. So when you're doing a seated cable row and we're trying to target the traps, the main thing, just focus on the same cues that I discussed for the chest supported T-bar row, except with the cable row, you're going to want to use a little bit more force and momentum. Think about cheating a little bit with the spine, leaning back ever so slightly as you pull, just to even out that resistance profile. So the main focus here, just squeezing your scaps together, driving your clavicles up and back like you're trying to squeeze your traps at the lower portion of the back of your neck, and that will get your traps cooking. So focus on those cues and that will work really well. Next one is going to be the single arm strict curl. 3 sets of 10 to 12 here. One main emphasis for the single arm strict curl, you want to just focus on elbow flexion. Just squeeze your elbow as hard as you possibly can. This one is a little bit different from the rest. You don't have to worry about completing the rep, so don't let your elbow track forwards just for the sake of getting the lockout. This one's kind of the oddball in this program, but basically with this, do as many reps as you can up to a 90-degree elbow bend. From there, you want to do 1 to 3 involuntary partials. So if you're unable to get the weight up to 90 degrees despite a maximal effort, that is a good thing. It means your bicep is pretty exhausted. So it's up to you if you want to do another couple partials after that, or if you just want to call it failure and end the set there, that is very valid too. So this one's a little bit different, but very, very effective lift. One other thing I'll note here, you can do it with either a cable or a dumbbell. It is very much up to you. Next lift we're going to have here is the lying rear delt raise. When it comes to this lying rear delt raise, it's going to be basically the same setup as the lying side raise. I would especially kick that bottom leg forwards on this, or set the bench up near a rack post or something that you can hold on to for extra stability. Since you're going to be changing where the load is relative to your own body weight, it is going to vary basically that moment arm throughout the entire range of motion. So from here, same thing as the cable rear delt fly. You want to go as far across your body as you can. So it's basically the same movement as that, just with a dumbbell instead. And you'll notice these feel quite good once you kind of find that groove. So pretty similar cues to the cable rear delt fly, just done with a dumbbell instead for a little bit of variety. Next lift here is going to be the seated hamstring curl, 3 sets of 8 to 10. Very straightforward lift. The main thing you want to focus on here is, just like leg extensions, go for a highly forceful concentric without quite being explosive. Go for a full range of motion, and you want to do, again, 1 to 3 involuntary partials once you hit failure. So despite a maximal effort to get to 90 degrees or beyond of knee flexion, you want to have 1 rep where you fail, and then it's up to you if you want to do another 1 or 2 partials beyond that. So very straightforward there. Try and get that leg roller that goes just above your knees down as low as you can for added stability as well. And that is going to be it for the second pull session. Now for the second push session, push B, we're going to start off with a 30-degree Smith press, 4 sets of 7 to 9. So when it comes to the incline Smith press, this is really just a low incline Smith press. It's going to be targeting the entirety of the pec. It's going to be a little bit more biased towards the upper pecs, but it's still going to be growing your pecs overall. So with these, basically focus on the same cues that I gave you for the 60-degree press. For the bar path, I'd go down to about the mid-pec level. If you want to go a little bit higher or lower, it is kind of up to preference, and basically grip width too. So if you use a wider grip, a little bit higher on the pecs will feel better. If you prefer a narrower grip, you might have to go a little bit lower, but that's pretty much it. So a little bit of an arch is fine, but I try and minimize it and use a mostly flat back. Up next, we're going to have the Smith behind the neck press, 3 sets of 7 to 9 here. This is going to be an excellent overhead press that really targets the front delt, as well as gets you a good amount of side delt stimulus too. So with these, there's going to be a couple main things you want to focus on. When it comes to the Smith behind the neck press, you are up to do these however you prefer. If you want to have a back support at 75 degrees, I've found that feels quite comfortable, and it can be a little bit easier from a mobility perspective. If you want to have a back support at 90 degrees, this can also work. It is more challenging from a mobility perspective, so if you don't have very mobile shoulders, 75 degrees of back support might just help. You can also do these seated without back support, just straddling a flat bench, and it works quite well because you can kind of shift around as you want. You're not locked into the bench, despite that potentially helping with a lack of shoulder mobility. So with these, focus on two main things. One, keep your abs flexed, keep your rib cage down. You will not be very strong in this lift relative to your overhead press, so do not compare your overhead press in front of the neck to your strength for behind the neck. It's two very different lifts. Your upper pecs cannot assist whatsoever on the behind the neck variation, so you're going to be a lot weaker. It might be around 33% weaker, give or take. That's just a rough estimate, so just keep that in mind. And if you're new to this lift, it can't hurt to start a little bit lighter, a little bit submaximally, and slowly add weight each week until you get to a point where you are doing challenging weights within that target rep range we have. And from here, you want to keep the abs flexed, keep the rib cage down, and the ultimate goal with the behind the neck press from a technique perspective, I would love for everybody to get to a point where they are able to get the bar all the way down to sitting on their traps for a full 1 or 2 seconds without deviating from their usual setup, so without letting your ribs pop up or your abs or your torso shift around. Try and maintain your setup, get the bar all the way down to resting on your traps, pause there for 1 or 2 seconds, and then press back up, maintaining that exact setup. So that is a long-term technique goal. Some very mobile people might be able to do that instantly, but I wouldn't expect everybody to be able to do that, at least right off the bat. So it is something to strive for over time. Improve your technique where you can, basically. Up next, we're going to have the dumbbell side raise. 3 sets of 15 to 20 here. Do these very strict. It's very easy to try and get heavier and force progressive overload simply by just adding weight or adding some cheat to your technique. There is absolutely a time and a place for that. I'm not against it whatsoever, but for the sake of this program, I do want to keep things a little bit stricter here. So what I do here, go light. For reference, I have been training for nearly 10 years, purely for bodybuilding, and I only use about 8 to 9 kilos on this, about 16, 17, 18 pounds. So when it comes to this dumbbell side raise, 2 main keys you want to focus on. 1, you want to raise in the scapular plane. So when you're at the bottom of the lift, have your hands right by the outside of your thighs. From here, raise about 15 degrees in front of you. So you don't want to be all the way out to your sides. It's going to be a lot of traps at that point. Raise just a little bit in front of you, and it will slightly minimize the trap involvement on that lift. From here, you want to think about going as strict as possible. Just like the behind the neck press, keep your abs flexed the entire time and fight to maintain that technique. The main thing you want to focus on here, chase grindy reps. If you get to a point where once the reps get hard, you just give up and let the weights come down, or you start cheating, or you just directly go into partials, you're not getting everything you can out of that set. You want to grind away. Chase the grindy reps. When you get to a point where it takes you 3 seconds to get from here to here, that is what's going to build your side delts the most. That will get you growing 100%. Like I said, I'm not against cheat reps when used properly, but for the sake of this program, let's use strict technique. Go for those grindy reps. It will get you growing. It's worked very well for me for the past few months. Next lift here is going to be the Smith Machine JM Press. 3 sets of 7 to 9. For the Smith JM Press, a couple basic cues here that will get you set up properly. So 1, I would use a flat bench. From here, you're going to want to have the bar land anywhere between the front of your chin and your clavicles. So from here, basically what you're looking for on a JM press, you want at the bottom your elbows to be above your shoulders but below your wrists. So if at the bottom your elbows are below your shoulders, you're going a little bit too low with the bar path. If your elbows are above your wrists, your bar path is a little bit too high. So you can see anywhere between the clavicles and the chin will get you in a pretty good spot. It is going to vary based on the individual because everybody has slightly different proportions and different builds. So play around with it, film your sets. Ideally try and film it from the height that the bench is at, and that should give you the best read into your technique. You don't have to overthink this one, just try and get a really deep range of motion on these. If you've never done them before, it is an extreme range of motion with a lot of tension in a place that our elbows haven't really been trained with high tension before, so feel free to start light. As Alex Leonidas says, he goes, start with a weight that you use for skull crushers. Very good setup to have, very good starting point for JM presses if you've never done them before. From here, what I would do, make sure you warm up properly. You don't have to overthink it. Just do a light weight to get a little bit of a pump and some blood flow to the area. And from there, you might want to do 1 or 2 more warm-up sets that are closer to your working weight to get a touch on something slightly heavier. From here, if you're starting sub-maximally, add 5 pounds each week until you get to a point where it is very challenging within your target rep range. Up next, beyond the BTN Press, the last lift in the program for the week, this is going to be the leg press. 3 sets of 6 to 8 here. You can pick whichever stance height feels best. Basically, the way this works, if you want to have a higher stance, it's going to be a little bit more hip dominant. It's going to be a little bit less quads. The higher your stance is, the less your knees are going to bend, the more your hips are going to bend. Vice versa for the low stance. For stance width, I would go anywhere between hip and shoulder width. A slightly wider stance can get you a little bit more hip adductor stimulus, so it is entirely optional if you want to go for that. And when it comes to where to point your feet, it is very much up to preference as well. It's up to whatever feels best for you in most cases. So you can play around with it. Just try and get deep. You want to get as low as you can before your lower back or your butt starts to come off the bench. So a little bit of that's fine, but if you start getting any pain or discomfort, you're going a little bit too low, just cut your range of motion a tad, and that's totally fine. On these, you want to push them hard. I usually aim for 2 to 0 reps in the tank. I would never take them to failure, and you'll get a pretty good idea of how that goes if you've ever been to failure on a leg press. And that is pretty much it. So that's all I've got for the program. Couple optional pieces of bonus work. So as you may have noticed, there was no ab or calf work in the program. So if you do want to do some ab work, you can do decline sit-ups twice a week. Your sets and reps are very much up to preference there. If you want to swap one of those decline sit-ups out for another ab lift or a machine crunch of choice, that's totally fine. When it comes to calf work, I would suggest doing a leg press calf raise on the final day of the program if you want to get some easy, quick calf work in, since you already have the weight loaded onto the leg press. I'd also say if you want to optimize calf growth, I would try and get in another session per week. You can do something easier to load up, like a seated or standing calf raise, or even a selectorized leg press. Works quite well since you don't have to load up a bunch of plates, but you still get all that hip support. When it comes to calf training, main thing I'd focus on is just keeping your knees locked, try and get really low, and I would avoid that peak contraction. So I'd aim for the bottom 50 to 75% of the range of motion, pause all the way down to the stretch. That feels great, and that is pretty much all I've got for you guys today. So again, thanks to Alan for giving me this opportunity, and that is all I've got. So enjoy the program, and if you have any questions, leave them in the comments, and I will get to what I can.